Hi, my name is Robert Dickey, and this is a short lecture on the topic of critical thinking. Critical thinking. So, if we talk about critical thinking, we should start with the question, well, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is, at the simplest level, just problem solving. Problem solving. And while it seems very basic at that level, in fact, critical thinking is one of the most prized skills or competencies that companies are looking for in their new hires. The people graduating from university, they expect that they will have two talents that traditionally weren't really taught in school, but that are key for company growth and company success. And those two skills or competences are critical thinking, which we're going to talk about here, and creative thinking or creativity, which is the subject of a separate recording. This critical thinking lecture will be pretty short, and it's basically a lecture. And the creativity recording is quite much longer, roughly an hour, and it's very much an activity-based video that I usually do in big groups, but for the purpose of this recording, each person has to kind of do the activities by themselves, and I hope you will. So, again, critical thinking in its most basic level is just basically problem solving. And what kind of problems are we talking about? Well, the first thing is we might say, I heard something. Is that true? This is especially important nowadays when there's so much on Facebook, there's so much on Twitter, there's so much on social media that we hear about, and somebody says, oh, did you know, la 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 la, blah blah blah. And then another person just repeats it. It's just maybe a rumor. Or maybe it's true. But how can we know? Are you just going to say what somebody else said and maybe find out later that what you said isn't true? So one of the key elements in problem solving in everyday life is just the question, is that true? The next kind of critical thinking is the question, why? Well, if that's true or if that happened, why did it happen? If customers don't like our product, why don't they like it? And again, this is the kind of thing where we've heard something, but we want to kind of double check. We want to verify. We want to confirm the information is true or that we're simply asking the right questions. It's not enough to ask questions. We have to ask the right questions. If we say, what's wrong with you? And somebody says, oh, I have a tummy ache. Well, we need to ask some more questions. Maybe if it's a small child, we might say, well, what did you eat? If it's an adult, we might not ask that question, but we might say, where did you eat? Or did you drink too much? Or have you had this problem before? Trying to find out why they might have a tummy ache, we maybe have to ask different questions in different situations. But if we want to talk a little more definitely, say, well, really, what is critical thinking? It's not just problem solving. What is it? Well, a more complete answer would be critical thinking is objective analysis and evaluation. Objective not subjective. Objective means that if 5 different people look at the same information, they will judge it the same way. That we have some kind of standards or agreed upon normals. If 5 people look at something and give very different answers, then that's probably subjective. Well, my thinking or my opinion is different. So that would be subjective. So we're looking for objective, using a process that many different people would agree, yeah, that's fair. That's not, only your way. Okay, analysis, we know, looking at something and trying to find out the what and the why. And evaluation. Evaluation is more looking at the, is it good? Did it succeed? Should it be an A rank or a B rank or a C rank? So the analysis is looking at the lower level data to find out what it really is, and evaluation is deciding if it's good or bad or better or worse. So critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue, whatever you decide to talk about or think about. But we're doing this analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Okay? The reason we're doing it is we want to come to a conclusion. And we want to say, yes, it's true. Or, no, that's not true. Or, why? Well, because this, and this. Critical thinking is not just soft thinking or I decided or I read it and it sounds good. Okay? So critical thinking, we can look at a different way. We could say critical thinking is the ability to think. Okay? So it's not just that somebody or some machine did it, but it's a skill, it's an ability to think, not to just kind of blindly go along with whatever, do what other people do, but to think, to have an ability to think in an organized and rational manner. Okay? That there's a process that we sit down and we go, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and other people look at it and say, that makes sense. That's reasonable. Rational means it looks like people are using their brain. The ability to think in an organized and rational manner in order to understand connections, relationships between ideas or facts. Ideas and facts. So somebody has an idea. Well, is that true? Well, let's check the facts. How do we check the facts? Well, we're going to look at it in an organized fashion. We're going to be rational. We're going to use our good brain to decide what is true, what is not true. How do we decide? Okay? So some people say that critical thinking is actually thinking about thinking. In some sciences, they use the term metacognition. Cognition you've heard about from me before, maybe. Cognition is the thinking process or thinking about. And meta means, in a bigger scale, it means basically thinking about thinking. So it's not enough to just kind of decide, but you need to know, how did you decide? What was your process? Think about the way you found your answer. That means that we need to identify things and analyze them and maybe fix any flaws in the way we think. So if I came to an answer, I might go back and look at that answer and look at the process. How did I decide? And I might find out that I made a mistake, or that I was assuming something. I believed something without double checking it. And because I believed it, but it was wrong, then my answer was wrong. So we're identifying flaws maybe, or we're just identifying the way we think, and we're analyzing any flaws, or just analyzing the way we think. And if there are any flaws, then we have to fix them. Identifying, analyzing, and then fixing any mistakes, flaw, error, not correct, not right. So really, when we're doing critical thinking, we're judging ourselves and or we're judging somebody else or something else, the source of the information. If I read it in a newspaper, can I believe it? Well, does that newspaper have a history of being true, or does that newspaper have a history of writing lots of things that are maybe not true? And how can I decide if it's true? Well, if the newspaper is usually true, maybe I don't have to dig too deep. I don't have to explore too much. I don't have to question too much. But if it's a newspaper that I'm not so sure is usually right, then I might want to try to find more information, more facts, and double check. Do these facts, when I look at them, do they match what that newspaper said? So the 5 key elements in critical thinking. The first, absolutely most important, is an unbiased observation. Unbiased means I'm not prejudiced, I'm not biased. I don't care if we find the answer A or the answer B. It doesn't matter to me. And that's the hardest thing, because very often we already come into a question with our answer. I want this to be true. I like Donald Trump. I like Joe Biden. So if I already like this concept, it's very easy to only see things that are favorable, that help me with my idea. So when we are looking for information, looking for facts, checking on things, that observation, that looking, we have to be unbiased. That means we have to control ourselves, self-regulation. And we have to be open-minded. We have to be ready to accept an answer that's not really what I think I want. I already feel this way, but I have to be ready for maybe the answer will be different. Okay, so first of all, we have to observe. We have to collect information. We have to see or read or hear or find, maybe survey information in a fair way, in an unbiased way. Then we analyze that data. Now, sometimes we have to really collect a lot of data and analyze it heavily. But other times it's much simpler. If we already can see there are 4 or 5 different sources of information, and this one and this one and this one are usually true, and this one I'm not so sure about, but they're all kind of coming to the same answer, then I maybe don't have to analyze too much. I have 5 points of information, and they all pretty much match. But I do have to be sure that I didn't collect those 5 points of information only from one side of the argument. If I only talk to Trump people, I'll probably get 5 different pieces of information that are the same, but they are maybe biased. And if I only talk to Joe Biden people, I'll get 5 from there. So I need to be sure that I'm collecting information widely that's unbiased. That's my observation, that's my analysis. From my analysis, we get to what some people call evaluation, some people call inference or interpretation. I've done analysis on a deeper level with this data or information. But now what does it mean? How can I use it? So that is the kind of the inference or interpretation. Part 4 definitely connects to part 3, just like part 3 connected to part 2, just like part 2 connected to part 1. Part 4 is explanation. Explanation is when we try to figure out what's the best way to tell people, to show why it's right. So I've done my analysis and come up with some information on a very basic level, and then I interpret or infer or evaluate that analysis to make sure it comes up to an answer that I believe is true. How does that answer fit in the world? That will be my explanation. And finally, communication is when I tell other people, or maybe myself, this new information. So before I type on Facebook, I should confirm information through unbiased observation, analyze it, evaluate it, explain it in my own mind, and then share with other people. That's the communication. Yeah, slow. Well, how do we do that? The fact is, it takes practice. And if you've heard some of my other talks, I've talked about musical math, where the idea is you need to practice every day. The more you practice, the better you get. If you take some days off, you start to forget. Your skills get rusty, less good. You go backwards. So you need to practice regularly. Find some question or issue and think about it carefully. Go through a few steps. Now, this lecture doesn't go in detail with all the different ways to analyze. This is just a starter. But it's asking you to think about what you think about. It's asking you to analyze things that you typically don't analyze. Critical thinking is questioning. Critical means challenging or questioning. That takes practice. Second, you need patience. You're not going to develop these skills overnight. It's not going to happen in a day or a week. Not even in a month if you do it every day. It'll get a lot better in a month, but it's not going to happen in a day or a week or a month. Critical thinking is a long-term skill. As an example, law school in most countries is 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. In America, 3 years after your bachelor's degree. In some countries, you do it at the same time you do your 4-year degree, but it takes 5 years. In some countries or some universities, you do 2 years or so of regular university and then you go into law school. But law school isn't about memorizing law. That's part of it, a small part. Law school is about critical thinking, about being able to look at information and question it and say, well, does that fit this? So he fell down on the street and the street had a crack. And the law says the city is supposed to take care of the crack. So the city is responsible because the man fell down? Well, wait a second. Yes, there's a crack in the street. Yes, the city is supposed to take care of the street. So yes, there is some kind of responsibility, probably. But why did the man fall down? He tripped on the crack? Really? How big was the crack? It was this big? Oh, come on. Nobody's going to trip over a crack there. Oh, he was drinking. He was drunk. Aha. So we start to ask more questions and look for information. Okay, so how many people have tripped over that crack in the past year? Nobody? Okay. Well, the first person could be enough. One person could be enough. But let's again look at more information. The man doesn't have a job and he needs money, and so maybe he's trying to get money from the city because he doesn't have a job because he drinks too much. Is this really a responsibility of the city because the man tripped on a crack? Yeah, probably the city should fix the crack, the little gap in the street, but we have to ask more questions and start questioning and challenging what people tell us. That takes practice. It takes patience. Law school's 3 years. And then reevaluation. Even after you decide things, from time to time you go back and do it again. You need to judge your own skills. Am I doing well? Am I getting better? Do I need to practice more? So critical thinking is about practice and practice and practice. It takes a long time. And we keep questioning ourselves. So, let's get to the point. How can you do critical thinking? Well, I have a few steps here that hopefully will help you. First, identify the problem or the question. Critical thinking needs a question, a problem. We are thinking about something critically. That means we are challenging what most people already think. Okay? So you need to identify a question or a problem, be precise. If you're fuzzy, if you're vague, if your question is too wide, you can never get to the answer. So the smaller, the tighter, the narrower the question, the easier it is to find an answer. And especially when you're practicing in early days, it's probably good to find a narrow question, a narrow issue, something that's simpler to check. We could say something like, everybody who likes bananas likes banana milkshakes. Was that true? Everybody who likes banana milkshakes. Well, we could test that. We could test that pretty easy. There are going to be some people who are allergic to milk. There are people who don't like cold drinks. And so we could eliminate that one really easy. Okay? Identify a question or a problem, a statement somebody makes, maybe, and check to see if it's really true. Then we're going to collect information, gather data, gather opinions, gather arguments. Now I need to shrink myself a little bit here so we can read this one. This one's got a lot of words. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we need to collect information from various places that don't ordinarily agree. That way we make sure that we are unbiased. So use several sources. Places that often disagree. If three different newspapers that usually disagree come up with the same answer, that's pretty good chance that's the right answer. Okay? So a lot of times in critical thinking, we don't have to start new, deep research. We don't have to go out and collect surveys from 8,000 people. Right? A lot of times critical thinking can be done in 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Because there's lots of data out there. In quick Google, you can find a lot of information. Okay? You don't necessarily have to double check all the raw data from other people. If they're generally reliable, then you get information from a few places and you kind of look and see, well, who did they say they asked? If they did surveys, what kind of a survey was it? So we're looking at the various arguments and what kind of information they presented, what data did they share. That's probably enough in most cases. Now, if you're doing a really important critical analysis for a $18 million project for your company, of course you're going to dig a little deeper. Okay? Now, part 3 is to identify your assumptions. Again, the key point here is unbiased. So whatever you already think is correct, that's an assumption. That's something you expect to be true or expect to be right. I expect that the New York Times is probably correct. That's an assumption. My assumptions don't have to be wrong, but I need to at least say, yes, I'm assuming this, and so I'm going to need to at least double check that, or at least recognize and tell people, well, yeah, I relied on the CNN and the New York Times and the BBC, and people go, yeah, well, those are all liberal media. You didn't check Fox News. Fox News is a famous conservative TV station in America. Kind of like if you're in Korea and you only look at the 중앙일보 and the 조선일보 and the 동아일보. These are known to be very conservative newspapers. Why didn't you check 현고래 or one of the other liberal newspapers to see if their data is the same, to see if their evaluation is the same? Maybe their data is very similar, but their evaluation is different. So we need to identify, write it down. What are my assumptions? So you don't forget and you don't let it slip aside. Okay? Be sure you're not biased when you're collecting your information. Then when you see things that don't match, question it. Be skeptical. That doesn't seem right. Okay? It doesn't mean it's wrong, but it means you need to challenge. That's the key in critical. And so sometimes you may have to go through your data and go, well, this just doesn't seem right. I'm going to put it on the side here. I'm not throwing it away. I'm going to put it on the side and try to collect some other information and see what happens. It could be this one thing, this one collection of data is not right. We may need to filter things a little bit, sort things a little bit, decide what's really correct and what's maybe less correct. Okay? The next step is to analyze and evaluate the data. We've collected data. We've figured out that it's probably good data, probably good. Let's analyze it, evaluate it. Okay, again, these things overlap a little bit. Is the data truly reliable? Are there conclusions, data backed, supported by the information? Or is it just argument? I have to say that in the last few years, CNN, which was a very, very news-based organization, has gotten more and more and more opinion. And it's become more and more liberal. And I'm pretty liberal, but it's noticeable that their opinion section is getting stronger and stronger, more and more. And there's less and less basic data being presented. I didn't say they don't have it, but they are analyzing their data and they're coming up with their information. And I need to step back and say, but wait a second. I hear your opinion, but I want to see the data. I want to compare it to other places. So we want to always double and triple check. Okay? Then, once we've come up with information that we feel is good, we need to decide what's the most important. Okay? Number 5 is establish significance. What is significant? What is important? What is impressive? What is big? What is strong? What piece of information is most important? Okay? If you have 3 or 4 different data collections, did they collect enough information? If they did a survey of 100 people, is that a good survey? Well, if I'm collecting students in my department, we only have about 200 students. A survey sample of 100 is probably good if they tried to mix around and ask lots of different kinds of people. If they only asked girls and they didn't ask boys, that sample might not be very good. But if I'm trying to represent the 20,000 students in a university and I have a sample of 100, that might not be big enough. It may not be wide enough. It may not be reflective of the total population. So the sample size or the sample style may not be okay. Okay? And then the data that they collect, is it all related to what we're talking about? Is it all related to this issue we're trying to talk about? Because sometimes we collect a lot of different data and then people use it for the wrong reason. They use it for the wrong purpose. Oh, 85% of people were against this. Well, really? Well, lots of those people were against something similar but not the same. So are all the opinions the same? Are they all relevant? That's the question. Okay, we're winding down to the end here. Step number 6, make a decision. What did you decide based on your critical analysis? If there's no final decision, you wasted your time. Okay? You have to decide. And you might decide, yeah, I agree. The other answer is a good answer. Or you might say, no, I don't think we can accept that answer. We have to look a little wider. We have to look a little farther. So you want to look at all the different possible answers. Think about what's the good points from this one and the bad points from that one. What are the strengths of this one? What are the weaknesses or limitations? Look at all the different possible answers that come out from your study and decide which one's the best. And maybe you might find, but also could be, what's the second best. So you've come to a decision in your mind that maybe possibly is enough for you. You're just trying to solve your own question. But if you're working for a company you got to communicate that decision. You need to let other people know what is right, what is wrong. We should buy this photocopier, not that photocopier. Okay? You need to present your information. You need to communicate. That might be in a formal presentation. It might be in a letter or a memo. It might be just talking to somebody over a cup of coffee. It might be, if we're talking about our own personal life, it might be deciding to write something on Facebook and saying why this is true. And I saw this in CNN, but it's not right because blah, blah, blah. Once you've reached a conclusion, you need to share it with everybody who would be concerned, all the stakeholders. And as I mentioned, it could be that it's just something you're doing for you and you don't really have to communicate it except in your own mind. You now know what you want to say. You understand it very well. So those are 7 steps. Now, different researchers, different teachers may present steps in different ways. I'm not saying there is one best way, but we're trying to walk through the idea of critical thinking. So the objective, the goal here in critical thinking is that you are comfortable and you're confident in your own answer. That when somebody says something, if you respond to that in words, in writing, in a nod of your head, that this is something that you're willing to put your name on and say, yeah, I agree, that's right. Because if you're at work and you're wrong, your boss is going to tell you. And it's not going to be a good feeling for you or for him. So you want to think carefully, you want to think critically, you want to have confidence in your answers. And that's our introduction to critical thinking. As I mentioned, there's a separate video that will be available on the topic of creativity or creative thinking. And creativity and critical thinking are, in some ways, 2 sides of a coin. To really make progress in this modern world, in this 21st century, we need to be able to make good decisions. That's our critical thinking. But we also need to be creative and to find new possibilities, not just examining existing possibilities, but inventing or creating new possibilities in the world. And as I mentioned, the creativity video is more activity-based. It's longer, but hopefully there's lots of puzzles and activities inside that you will enjoy. So thank you very much. That's the end of today.